everyone for joining us. This is our final Ollie Short of the year. I'm kind of sad about that, but I'll tell you what, we are going out in a great way. You are going to love today's speaker. So thank you for joining us. The earlier part of the month, we had some incredible stuff going on. As you know, our Ollie semester starts on Monday. So we have lots of classes coming up, and I hope you got registered for the ones you're looking for. Know that we are watching those waiting lists. If there's only a couple waiting lists right now, but if you're on one, we're going to do our best to get you into classes. We are currently looking for hosts for classes too. If you can help us out with that, we would love it. Send us an email. We'll put the email address in the chat. If anyone has any questions, we're going to leave them toward the end, but feel free to put them in the chat as you think of them. Also, if you're on Facebook, please send us a message on Facebook, write the questions there, and we'll watch for those as well. So I would love to welcome Eleanor Turner to the Ollie Short stage. Eleanor, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. And I thought I would just tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here. And the best way to do that is typically with sharing a couple of slides. I promise there aren't many. I think it's going to prompt some interesting discussion. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what questions you will have at the end. Everybody has an opinion on baby names, whether you think you do or you don't. I'm fairly convinced that everybody here has an opinion on baby names. So we're gonna delve into it a little bit today. So things we're going to cover today. We're going to look at what the data says about baby names currently, as well as historically. I'm going to look at some of the trends that are happening both in the US and around the world. As you can probably tell, I'm not from around here. I'm not a South Dakotan native. And so my interest is not purely in American baby names, but it's globally. And then talk a little bit about what I call the mistakes, which maybe they're not mistakes to the people who choose these names, but I think some of them kind of look like spelling errors. And so we're going to get into that as well, and then leave plenty of time at the end for any questions that you have. So a little bit about me and my background. I've written about 24 books on the topic of baby names. There's the front cover of one of them up there. And I fell into it by accident. Honestly, I wrote another book about emigrating to the States, and it did pretty well. And my publisher reached out and said, hey, we have this idea on doing kind of like a farmer's almanac, but of baby names. And because the data changes every year, and we wondered, would you be interested in writing a book? And I'm like, well, I know absolutely nothing about baby names. This was in 2008. And I'm like, but you know what? I got that British spirit. Why not? Let's go for it. So I happened to be pregnant with my first child at the time. So the stars aligned, and I ended up publishing, the first book was published in 2009 with the title Baby Names 2010. And I've done 1 to 2 books every year since then. My books are published all over the world, and you can walk into Barnes & Noble right here in Sioux Falls and find them. And they're on Amazon and places like that as well. Other things that I've done, I've contributed to a number of articles. I've been on some interviews and things like that. I once did a very bizarre one for Australian TV where I had to go up to the Twin Cities and do something by satellite. It was very bizarre. And then the reason I have a Home Alone Lego set here is when they launched this Lego set, they had in Europe a whole marketing campaign about the name Kevin. If you've seen the movie, the little boy who's left home alone is called Kevin. And when they launched this set about 2-3 years ago, the ad campaign around it was, where's Kevin? And so they highlighted in all these different countries people who are called Kevin, because the name Kevin has declined in popularity. And so they kind of tied the whole marketing campaign into this name. And they asked me to provide some of that market data. for them. And so in an indirect way, I like to think I was responsible for the success of this set, but of course that's not true at all. I do have a TEDx talk out, and then in my regular job, I work for USD at the Sanford School of Medicine, and I also run a small nonprofit as well that we can talk about another time. So let's get into proper baby names. The data, what do we know about it? I love statistics. I hope some of you do too. I won't get too nerdy, but let's talk about it a little bit. So I told you I'm from the UK. So these are the two main areas that I focus on. In the UK and in the US, both countries do track baby names data quite closely. So you can see in the UK, for the most recent data we have, the number of individual names registered. So this would mean registering John and James and Joseph. That would be 3 entries. And so there were 6,201 individual boy names registered in the UK. In the US, 13,993 for boys, 17,544. That's individual names. Out of that, there were 1.6 million baby girls that were registered with those names. Now, what's interesting about this is that over time, names are becoming more varied. So this data right at the bottom, the top 10 names as a percentage, those percentages are getting smaller and smaller. So what does that mean? In the US, that the top 10% of boys, baby boys that have a name that's in that top 10 is getting smaller. So a couple of years ago, it was about 8% of boys had their name in the top 10. It's now at 7.78, and it's continuing to decline. Girls were at 7.67, and it's continuing to decline. So that means that there is a greater variety of names that we're seeing. So there are more and more names with different spellings. People are creating their own names. And it's why you often hear names that maybe you haven't heard for a very long time, or names that you swear somebody just invented. Maybe somebody just threw a bunch of Scrabble tiles on the board and went, that looks great, let's go with that. Who knows? But the data, it does say that names are becoming more diverse, they're becoming, and we're just having more and more of them. So I like to keep track of this year after year, and I think that this kind of stuff is fascinating. There's a lot of information on this page. I'm happy to share more, to share the slides with you all later. But this has the listing of the top 5 baby boy names across the world for the most recent data we have available. So if you look, for example, at Northern Ireland, we've got first place, we've got Jack, then Noah, James, Charlie, and Oliver. Pretty solid names, I think you'd agree. The only one that might be a little unusual is Charlie, and that's because traditionally you would have found it as Charles, and there's a trend in Europe that is making its way over to the States at the moment for taking a traditional name and abbreviating it or turning it into a nickname and then registering the nickname as the formal name. So you end up with Charlie being in the top 5 rather than Charles. Now, I don't know if this has anything to do with the current king. I doubt it. I'm just saying. Other ones on there, we've got some really interesting ones from Europe, Portugal, we've got Francisco, Duarte, Spain, Hugo, Mateo. Something I love about New Zealand is that they, see, I told you I really do love baby names, and I get very granular about it, so I apologize if I go on, but in New Zealand, they produce 2 lists. They have one for more European style names. So on here, you've got Oliver, Noah, Leo, Jack, Luca, but you've also got the Maori names. So they're more indigenous names. And they, when they publish these names, those 2 data sets are right next to each other. There isn't one that is publicized more than the other. They are treated equally, which I just I love. So these are all the boys. I don't know if any of you have your names on there or names of your children or grandchildren, but these are currently the top ranked names across the world for boys. Same for girls. Just digging in a little bit more here. Countries tend to only publish data where there are, they don't publish data that is only one name. What do I mean by that? So, for example, in the US, your name will only be included if there are 5 or more entries. So a child's name has to be registered 5 or more times to appear in the data set. In the UK, it has to be 3 or more times to appear in the data set. In most countries, it is grouped by spelling and not by sound. So, for example, Amelia and Emilia will be counted as 2 separate entries. There are some exceptions to that. You can see here that in Germany, Sophia and Sophia, those 2 names, so ranked 3rd, those 2 names would be counted as 2 different entries in the UK and the US. In Germany, that is counted as 1 entry. So there are some countries that just group them by sound rather than by spelling. And then sometimes it can be really hard to gather the data. Canada really likes to take up a lot of my time every year because Canada likes to publish each territory's baby names information, but they don't publish national data. And so you then have to go in and gather all the different territories' information and pull it all together and then create your own lists and then work your way through that. So it takes about as much time to do Canada's little entries, this one little entry for the book, as it does to do everything else on the list combined. So again, perhaps you've seen your own name on there, names of your friends, family, but these are the current top 5 around the world. Something a little more interesting from the Social Security Administration, which is who publishes the US data. In first place over the last century, the name given to the most boys out of any name since 1923 is James, and for girls it is Mary. Now, what's interesting about that is that Mary and James don't always appear in the top 10. In fact, Mary, I think, is somewhere in like 50th, maybe 60th place at the moment. It is not a high-ranking name at the moment, but because so many baby girls were named it over the last century, it continues to rank very highly. In fact, it's still the #1 name over the last 100 years. And in South Dakota, our current favorites are Oliver and Evelyn. So let's get into the trends, what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing a lot of similar sounding names, and now this is across the entire data set, and this is just for the States. So we are seeing William, Liam, Leo, Lucas, Mateo, Martin, a lot of L sounds and M sounds for boys. For girls, we're seeing Isla, Amelia, Emilia, Emma, Maya, Mia, Ella, a lot of these ER sounds. We're also seeing the first sounds and the V sounds. So Sophie, Sophia, Sophia, Ivy, Ava, and Vera. Those are all names that have either stayed high ranking in the last 5 to 10 years or have dramatically increased in popularity. Other trends we're seeing, traditional names. There is a trend you see in baby names where a name that was popular 100 years ago comes back into fashion. So names that were popular back in the Roaring 20s are now back in full force. Names that were popular in 1974, not so popular now. So I apologize if any of you were naming children in the 70s. Unfortunately, those names are not popular at all. Now, I'm a child of 1983. My name is, it kind of hovers around rank 20 or so, but for many years it was not a popular name at all. So, what we would consider a traditional name tends to wax and wane, really. So we've got names at the moment like Charlotte, very popular name, very traditional name. But then you've also got names like Ivy and Vera. Ivy and Vera were not necessarily thought of as traditional for a long time. But with this 100-year rule, people have rediscovered names that were popular back in the 20s, and both of those names were. So they're now considered both traditional and cool again. I have a personal theory about this, which is if you're growing up and you hear your parents talking about their friends and you overhear it, and suddenly those names aren't cool anymore because your parents aren't cool. And so you don't want to use those names anymore. So I'm not going to use the names of my parents' generation when I'm naming my own children. And probably my children will do the same. Media is a huge influence on us. A lot of what we hear both in politics, TV, movies, huge influence, sports, a huge influence in what we name our children. And then the world of religion. Of course, biblical names have always been very strong, very domineering. But now we have in the UK, which has always been an island made up of immigrants, we have a lot of Middle Eastern immigrants that come in. And so Mohammed is now the 4th most popular boy's name in the UK, which you couldn't have imagined about 50 years ago. And so religion is definitely playing a role in shaping baby names in the UK, but in many different countries. Okay, so the highest climbers, now these would be names that they're not necessarily at the top of the charts, but these are the ones that perhaps started quite low and have had a huge jump in a year. So they might have been like ranked 1,000 and suddenly 20 different people chose this name and now they've spiked in popularity. So we've got, for boys, we've got names like Amiri, Ozzy. I don't know if Ozzy Osbourne had something to do with that. Loyal. For girls, we've got Angelique. That's quite a cute one. Vida. Don't know where that one came from. Maybe the V trend again. And then the fastest fallers. So these would be names that work in reverse. A lot of those names that were popular about 10 years ago are now appearing on this list. We used to do a lot with names that had Y's in them. We would substitute I and E for a Y, and that was very trendy. Those names are now falling out of fashion. So we've got Jackson and Carson are appearing on this. So we're going to see fewer kindergartners with names that have a Y in. Denise, spelt both ways with 2 S's and another S. Karen, which again, one of those names that was very popular in the 70s, 60s and 70s, now falling dramatically out of fashion. And then Keely and Nathalie. So I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. We're almost at the end here. The mistakes. This is probably my favorite thing to talk about, which is the names that you just can't believe that people chose. Some particular highlights on here would be Stephanie, which is in the US. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but the US girls, Steheny. I don't know where that one came from or why somebody thought that one. How about Fizzer up here? You know, if you're pregnant and you're looking at your baby bump and you think, you know what, the best name I can come up with is Furious. This is what I'm going to name this beautiful baby that I'm going to give birth to, or Patch, or Keeper. I mean, there's so many amazing, truly amazing names on this, and these are the ones that that I can pronounce. There are lots of them on there, and I don't mean cultural names. I don't mean names that are indigenous to other nations or other languages. I mean, these are truly bizarre names that people have invented for themselves. So again, hopefully I can share these slides with you at some point and you can really dig into the world of truly bizarre baby names, because there are some amazing ones on there. And then finally, celebrity baby names, which is always a topic of interest for people. I think the ones over the last few years people remember are Apple, Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter. She's in her early 20s now, I believe. Audio Science, again, you know, you're expecting this beautiful baby and you decide the only name that would be suitable for this child is Audio Science. That's amazing. Recently, Ed Sheeran and his wife had, I think it was their third child, named it Jupiter. Now, he's a musician, so, I mean, you know, the famous piece of music, Jupiter, maybe. Penn Jillette, he always gets rolled out on these lists because he named his daughter Moxie Crime Fighter. When he was challenged about this, he said, well, Moxie means, you know, having some fight to you. Entirely missing the point that people were not concerned about the name Moxie. They were asking him about the name Crime Fighter. But you do you, Penn Jillette. And then this one I just love at the bottom. On paper, it probably looks quite regular. To Simone, last name Morrow. But if you take out the word Simone and just say it to yourself, that's another great name. So that's, I think, all I have time for in terms of the presentation. But believe me, I could probably rattle on for another hour or two about baby names. And I'm sure you all have stories of your own that you could share or questions. So I will open it up to you.
We've got a couple comments in the chat. People mentioned a couple names like Moon Unit, Zappa, I remember her, and giving 3 of your kids the same name like Michael Jackson did.
Yeah, or when Kim Kardashian was married to Kanye West, and they did Northwest, Saint West, and there were some other ones, and I just thought Northwest was, I mean, it was amazing, giving your child a name Northwest. So yeah, I don't know. There's Nick Cannon, TV presenter at the moment. I think he is up to his 12th child with 5 or 6 different mothers. The names that he's gone with are spectacular. And I encourage any of you who have a few extra minutes to go on and look at his. And there are lots of celebrities actually who name their children after themselves, and not in the traditional sense of like so and so junior, so and so the third, but genuinely just I'm just going to give them the same name as myself. And you know, celebrities I think have a brand, and they need to stand out from the crowd. You know, if I say Rihanna or Adele, you know who I'm talking about. But I think, and so perhaps there's a tendency for celebrities to want that for their children. You know, if they're having to establish their own brand with their name, perhaps they think it's easier to do that with an unusual name for their children. I don't know, that's just a theory that I have, but yeah, imagine having the same name as all of your siblings. It'd be a nightmare at the dinner table.
I can't imagine. Have any studies been done on the effects of kids having unusual names, like them being teased or bullied?
There's quite a lot of research done on names, and I've seen some articles. There was one on the BBC a couple of years ago about names that were difficult to pronounce, and so not perhaps unusual, but just difficult to pronounce, or names that were from another culture, and perhaps your parents have moved to a different culture, and that name means something completely different now. And these were adults that were being interviewed, and it was really interesting the perspectives that they were being given. You know, there's a comedian, Hassan Minhaj, who says, you know, there's a lot of names. If you can say names, and he listed a bunch of Caucasian actors, and he said, if you can name their names, you can name, you know, you can say mine. And so, I think it depends on your definition of unusual. Would this be names that are unusual to you, or are these names that are unusual to everybody? Like my example of just throwing Scrabble letters on a board. Nobody usually pronounces my name correctly because I'm from the UK, and in the UK we pronounce it Eleanor. And yet I come to the States and it's Eleanor. When people say Eleanor here and they're referring to me, sometimes I don't respond because I genuinely don't think that's my name. And it takes me a minute and I have to think. So, even a name as common as that, you can run into issues with it. So.
Interesting. Kathy writes in our chat, names that nobody knows how to pronounce correctly when written. Her niece is named A-I-N-E, pronounced Anya. And there's supposed to be an accent over the A, which you can't type.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of Gaelic names that this happens to as well. Beautiful names, Siobhan and Theodra and gosh, I mean, you name it. I think that's more common than you think. Yeah, I could probably bring to mind a dozen or so examples where, yes, if we don't have it on a standard keyboard, of course, now that the world has moved to more technological forms of communication instead of handwritten, that is something to consider when you're naming a child. Can you type it over and over and over again and still have it typed correctly, still have it sent correctly to people?
Exactly. One of the reasons I found you is because I've always been fascinated by this book called Freakonomics, and Freakonomics has a podcast and there's several versions of the book now, but the original version had a whole chapter on names, and it talked about kids that were named things like winner and loser and what happened to them because of their names. And interestingly enough, winners weren't always winners and losers weren't always losers, or sometimes they were. But I've always thought names, what you name even your dog, is absolutely fascinating, and how it may affect that person or that animal for the rest of their life.
Yeah, or maybe the career that they choose. There's how many examples can we think of I don't know, Usain Bolt, who, for a time there was the fastest man on earth. There's if you look online, there's lots of articles of, lawyers who have legal sounding names and dentists with, teeth sounding names and things like that. And you have to wonder, is that because of their name, or, is that what people always said to them over the years? Oh, you're going to be a dentist because of your name. And eventually the idea just sort of stuck. Or was that because, they always wanted to do that regardless of their name? I don't know.
Anne says she knows someone named Les Moore. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to unmute for?
What are the names that you wouldn't recommend?
That I would not recommend?
Right.
As much as I love traditional names, I think anything that is very, very long and gets difficult to fit on a passport application form, I think those ones. Plus, people avoid using them. If you have something that's really long, people find ways to shorten it, and then you're never called your full name, which I think is always really sad. Maybe that's not a reason not to use it, but I always think people are just going to shorten it to a nickname and, maybe pick something that's going to be used fully. There's a quote by a comedian that says, always end the name of your child with a vowel so that when you yell at them, the sound will carry. Yeah, I think that's a great quote.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Definitely. Oh my goodness. Well, I am so glad you could join us today, Eleanor. And just so you know, for those of you in the Sioux Falls area, Eleanor is going to be back for a class later this semester. This starts on Monday. And we'll be talking to her about some really, I can't remember the name of your class right now.
Turning heartbreak into humanitarianism.
There we go. Heartbreak into humanitarianism. So thank you everyone for joining us. I have loved doing Ollie Shorts with you this February. It is always a challenge and a really fun time. So thank you, and we will see you in person very soon, hopefully. And Eleanor, thank you. I look so forward to your class, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you all.